What if the person who knew you best was also the person you never thought you could lose? Two teenagers walking across an Arizona high school campus, carrying books, laughing together. 15-year-old Natalie Brooks met Andrew Whitmore in an ordinary classroom. 3 months later, they were inseparable. Years after that, they would stand together at a wedding altar, but neither of them could have imagined what their friendship would eventually cost them. Natalie was the talkative one. Andrew was quieter. She could turn a 10-minute lunch break into an hour-long conversation. He was the person who listened until she had nothing left to say. They studied together, shared rides when they could, covered for each other when one forgot an assignment. And slowly, Andrew became the first person Natalie called when life stopped making sense. Their classmates assumed they would eventually date. They laughed whenever anyone said it. They weren't interested in romance. At least not then. They were simply two teenagers who had somehow found the one person who understood them without requiring an explanation. And that friendship became stronger every year. Years passed. After graduation, life pulled them in different directions. Natalie started building her career. Andrew began working toward his own future. They made new friends. They dated other people. They became adults. But every birthday still came with the same call. Every major achievement came with the same person being told first. When Natalie had her worst breakup, Andrew showed up. When Andrew struggled with a decision about his future, Natalie stayed on the phone until he figured it out. Neither demanded anything from the other. That was what made their friendship unusual. They didn't need to be together every day to remain important to each other. Then came the year their friendship nearly changed forever. Natalie was considering moving away from Arizona for a new opportunity. Andrew encouraged her. He told her she should go. But when the day came, Natalie realized something she hadn't expected. Leaving wasn't frightening because of the new city. It was frightening because Andrew wouldn't be there. She canceled the move. Not because Andrew asked her to. He didn't. She simply realized that the life she wanted wasn't necessarily somewhere else. Sometimes it was standing beside you. Years later, Natalie would say that Andrew had been part of every important chapter of her life. School, graduation, heartbreak, success, failure, everything. But there was one chapter neither of them had planned. Because somewhere between being teenagers and becoming adults, Natalie's best friend had quietly become the person she couldn't imagine growing old without. And when that realization finally reached them, neither was prepared for what it would mean. How do you fall in love with someone who has already been your home for years? Natalie Brooks and Andrew Whitmore had spent more than a decade calling each other best friends. Then one ordinary evening changed the way Natalie looked at him. Andrew had just helped her through another painful breakup. He didn't tell her to move on. He didn't criticize her. He simply sat beside her and listened. Before leaving, Andrew said something simple. "You deserve someone who stays." Natalie looked at him, and suddenly she understood. The person she had been searching for in other relationships had been beside her all along. But she was afraid to say it, because if she was wrong, she could lose the friendship that had survived everything. Andrew felt the same fear. Neither wanted to destroy 13 years of trust for the possibility of romance. So they waited, until one quiet moment, Natalie finally asked, "What if we've been looking at this the wrong way?" Andrew didn't answer immediately. He just smiled, and that was enough. Their first relationship wasn't dramatic. It was comfortable. They already knew each other's habits. They knew when to talk. They knew when to give each other space. They had already seen each other at their worst. Now they were discovering each other differently. For Natalie, it felt less like falling in love and more like finally recognizing something that had been there for years. One evening, Natalie told her mother, "I think I found the person I was looking for." She wasn't talking about a stranger. She was talking about the boy she had met at 15. The boy who became her best friend. The man who had stayed through every chapter. And soon, Andrew would ask her to spend the rest of her life with him. Neither of them knew that their happiest decision would eventually force Natalie to question everything she believed about the man she trusted most. What would you plan for if you believed you had your whole life ahead of you? Natalie and Andrew stopped talking about someday. They started making plans. A home of their own. Family. Sunday breakfasts. Road trips across the Southwest. Growing old in the same place where their story had started. Natalie and Andrew looking through house listings together at a kitchen table. Andrew proposed without a crowd. No cameras. No elaborate setup. Just two people who had already spent years choosing each other. Natalie said yes through tears. Their families celebrated. Claire Whitmore helped Andrew choose the ring. Susan Brooks began discussing wedding arrangements with Natalie. Robert Brooks joked that he had been waiting years for the proposal. For once, everything seemed simple. Then came the wedding planning. Venue, guest list, flowers, photographs, promises. Natalie wanted one thing above everything else. A marriage that felt like their friendship, honest, safe, and permanent. Andrew agreed. But there was one conversation about their future that Natalie would remember differently later. One evening, while discussing where they would live after the wedding, Andrew suddenly became quiet. Natalie asked what was wrong. He smiled and said, "Nothing. I'm just thinking about how lucky I am." She believed him, and perhaps he was telling the truth. But there was something about their future that Andrew had not told her. Not yet. Natalie thought the wedding was the beginning of their life together. Andrew knew it was the moment when every promise they had made would become permanent. Neither understood how important that difference would become. Because before Andrew could become her husband, he had already made one decision Natalie knew nothing about. After 13 years of knowing each other, Natalie finally walked toward Andrew as his bride. The ceremony was held during the day, surrounded by the people who had watched their relationship grow from teenage friendship into love. Natalie was emotional when she reached the altar. Andrew looked at her and smiled. For a moment, there was no crowd, no wedding photographer, no celebration. Just the two friends who had first met in a classroom years earlier. Natalie promised to stand beside him through whatever life brought. Andrew made the same promise. Their families watched through tears. Then they exchanged rings. And the woman who had once called Andrew her best friend became his wife. After the ceremony, they celebrated with the people closest to them. Natalie laughed more that afternoon than she had in months. She believed the hardest part of finding the right person was already behind her. She had found him at 15. She had loved him as a friend. Then she had fallen in love with him. Now she had married him. That evening, Natalie looked at her husband and believed she finally understood what their future would look like. A home, family, decades together. She had no reason to imagine anything else. But there was something Andrew had been carrying long before he stood at that altar. And Natalie was about to discover that the man she trusted most had entered their marriage knowing something she didn't. For 13 years, Natalie had known Andrew better than anyone. She was about to learn how much she had never known at all. Asterisk, asterisk. What if your husband knew his life could be shorter than he ever told you? Natalie believed the first weeks of marriage were supposed to be ordinary. She and Andrew settled into their routine. They talked about their home, future plans, and the family they hoped to build. Then Natalie noticed something she couldn't explain. Andrew had become unusually careful about his schedule. Not distant, not cold, just careful. One afternoon, Natalie found paperwork among Andrew's personal documents. She wasn't searching through his belongings. She was looking for information about an appointment they had discussed. Then she saw a medical provider's name and a date. She recognized neither. Natalie asked Andrew about it. He went quiet. For the first time since they had met as teenagers, he didn't immediately answer her. Finally, he admitted that he had been receiving medical treatment before their wedding. Natalie's stomach dropped. "How long?" she asked. Andrew looked at her. "Before we got married." That answer hurt more than the diagnosis itself. Because Natalie suddenly understood that while she had been planning a lifetime with him, Andrew had already been calculating how much of that lifetime he might actually have. Andrew finally told her the truth. He had a serious medical condition. His doctors believed it could become life-threatening. He had been warned that his prognosis might be limited. Natalie couldn't speak. She wasn't angry because he was sick. She was devastated because the person she had trusted since childhood had made one of the biggest decisions of their lives without giving her the truth. Then Andrew said something that changed the entire conversation. "I didn't tell you because I was afraid you would marry me because you felt sorry for me." Natalie stared at him. After 13 years together, she had one question left. "What else didn't you tell me?" Andrew didn't answer. And that question would lead Natalie to something even more painful than his diagnosis. Natalie had finally learned that Andrew was sick. Then she discovered he had been preparing for something else. Andrew eventually showed Natalie the medical documents. His diagnosis had been confirmed months before their wedding. The prognosis was serious. But there was something Natalie couldn't understand. If Andrew knew his condition could shorten his life, why had he waited until after the wedding to tell her? Then she noticed a date on one of the documents. The date was several months before Andrew had asked her to marry him. Natalie confronted him. Andrew finally admitted that he had already been told his illness could become life-threatening before he proposed. But he insisted there was another reason he kept quiet. He hadn't wanted Natalie to make a decision based on fear. He wanted her to choose him because she loved him, not because she felt responsible for him. Natalie was devastated, not because he was sick, because he had decided what she was allowed to know. Then she asked the question that stopped him. "If you were willing to hide this from me before we got married, what else did you decide I didn't need to know?" Andrew looked down. This time he didn't deny it. He had already made arrangements for what would happen if his condition became worse. And one of those arrangements involved Natalie. She had never seen the document. She had never agreed to it. And now she had to find out exactly what Andrew had planned for her life after he was gone. Because the decision Andrew had made wasn't about his illness. It was about what he intended to leave behind. ***. Andrew had not been planning how to escape Natalie. He had been planning how to protect her after he was gone. Natalie finally learned what he had been preparing. Andrew had created a financial trust in her name. He had arranged for the remaining money from his savings, insurance, and personal assets to go directly to Natalie if his condition became terminal. But there was one thing he had never given her: a choice. He had decided that she should marry him without knowing how serious his illness was. That was the part Natalie couldn't forgive. Not the diagnosis, not the prognosis, the deception. Andrew admitted that he had been afraid. He feared Natalie would abandon their wedding. He feared she would stay only because she felt obligated. And after 13 years of friendship, he couldn't bear the thought of becoming someone she married out of pity. But Natalie told him something he had never considered. "You didn't protect my choice. You took it away." That sentence changed everything. The trust remained. The marriage remained. But Natalie refused to pretend the deception had been acceptable. She insisted that every future medical decision be made openly, with both of them informed. Andrew agreed. For the first time since the diagnosis, there were no decisions made on Natalie's behalf. Only decisions they made together. There was no hidden killer, no conspiracy, no stranger waiting outside their lives. The deepest betrayal came from someone Natalie trusted completely. A man who loved her enough to plan for her future, but was so afraid of losing her that he denied her the truth. And that became the justice Natalie needed. Not revenge, not punishment, the right to know the truth and choose her own life. After the secret was exposed, Natalie made Andrew promise something different. Never make a life-changing decision for her again. Because love can survive illness, can survive fear. But trust can only survive when both people are allowed to know the truth. The vows were real. The love was real. But so was the betrayal. And Natalie finally understood what had been waiting after the vows. Not a perfect marriage. A truth they would have to face together. ***. If you want more emotionally driven mysteries and carefully constructed cases, subscribe to The Veil of Secret.